A war hero defies his emperor. His refusal could mean execution, but his act of rebellion may have saved thousands of lives and changed the course of history. Before these, do you have any memories of World War II? Enjoy watching. I wish you good health. August 2nd, 1945. Kanoya Air Base, Kyushu, Japan. The heat presses down on the tarmac like a physical weight. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida stands in the shadow of a damaged Mitsubishi Zero, its fuselage scarred by shrapnel, engine cowling streaked with oil. Around him, the air base hums with desperate activity. Mechanics working on aircraft that will never return, ground crews loading bombs onto planes that have become flying coffins. The smell of aviation fuel mingles with the acrid scent of burned metal. In the distance, the volcanic peak of Sakurajima rises against a colorless sky. Fuchida is 43 years old. His face, withered by years of combat and command, shows the deep lines of a man who has witnessed the transformation of war from calculated strategy to suicidal desperation. 4 years ago, he led the first wave of attackers over Pearl Harbor, coordinating 183 aircraft in the operation that brought America into the war. Now he has been summoned to this southern base for a meeting that could end his life. Inside the command bunker, Vice Admiral Matao Omagaki waits. The concrete walls are damp with humidity, maps of the Pacific plastered across every surface, each one showing the shrinking perimeter of Japanese control. The Solomon Islands gone, the Philippines lost, Iwo Jima, Okinawa fallen. Red circles mark American bases, growing ever closer to the home islands. Ogaki's uniform is immaculate despite the heat, his face carved from granite. He is a true believer, a warrior who has already written his own death poem and keeps it folded in his breast pocket. Captain Fuchida. Ogaki begins without preamble. You have been selected to organize and lead the next wave of special attack operations. The words hang in the air. Special attack. Tokubetsu Kogiki Tai. The sanitized term for kamikaze, divine wind, the tactic that has consumed thousands of Japan's pilots, transforming young men into guided missiles, their aircraft into bombs, their lives into weapons. Fuchida does not move. He has anticipated this moment for weeks, has felt it approaching like a storm on the horizon. Around him, other officers stand at attention, their eyes fixed forward, their expressions carefully neutral. These are men who have learned to hide doubt, to bury fear beneath layers of discipline and duty. Admiral, Fuchida says, his voice steady, I must respectfully decline this order. The silence that follows is absolute. In Japanese military culture, such a refusal is unthinkable. It is not merely disobedience, it is treason. Officers have been executed for less. In the rigid hierarchy of the Imperial Japanese Navy, an order from a superior is the voice of the emperor himself, and to refuse is to reject the divine will. Ogaki's hand moves to the samurai sword at his side, not as a threat, but as a reflex, fingers finding the familiar grip. His eyes narrow. You understand what you are saying, Captain? I do, sir. Fuchida takes a measured breath. And I ask you to hear my reasoning before you pass judgment. The other officers shift uncomfortably. This is unprecedented territory. Commander Minoru Genda, Fuchida's longtime colleague and the tactical genius behind Pearl Harbor, stands near the wall, his face unreadable. Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Ataya, another Pearl Harbor veteran, watches with barely concealed tension. Fuchida continues, his words chosen with surgical precision. For 4 years, I have trained pilots. I have watched boys become warriors, watched them master the complexities of carrier operations, navigation, combat tactics. Each pilot represents thousands of hours of training, millions of yen in resources, and irreplaceable combat experience. He pauses. The special attack strategy is consuming our most valuable assets, not just the aircraft, but the knowledge and skill contained in each pilot's mind. Ogaki's jaw tightens. Those pilots die with honor, taking enemy ships with them. One plane, one ship. This is the way of the warrior. One plane, one ship. Fuchida echoes. But Admiral, our intelligence reports show different numbers. At Okinawa, We launched over 1,900 kamikaze sorties. We sank approximately 30 ships and damaged 368 others. That is a success rate of less than 20%, and most of the sunk vessels were smaller craft, not the carriers and battleships we targeted. He steps forward, his voice gaining intensity. But consider this. Each of those 1,900 pilots could have flown 10, 20, perhaps 50 more conventional combat missions. They could have trained 10 other pilots each. They could have adapted tactics, learned from mistakes, passed on knowledge. Instead, we have converted skilled warriors into single-use weapons. The bunker is utterly still. Fuchida is articulating thoughts that have haunted many of these officers, doubts they have suppressed beneath duty and honor. We are losing the war, Fuchida continues. Not because our pilots lack courage. They have proven their bravery beyond question. We are losing because we are destroying our institutional knowledge faster than we can replace it. The Americans shoot down 10 of our planes, and we lose 10 pilots. We shoot down 10 of theirs, and they return to base, share their lessons, improve their tactics, and fly again the next day. Vice Admiral Agaki remains silent, his expression unreadable. But something has shifted in the room. Other officers are listening now, not just hearing. Fuchida presses his advantage. I propose an alternative, Admiral. Allow me to keep the most experienced pilots alive. Let them train the younger men in advanced evasion, in striking tactics that give them a chance to return. Let them become force multipliers rather than single-use weapons. If we must use special attack tactics, let them be the absolute last resort for pilots who are already wounded or whose aircraft are too damaged to return, not the first option for our best warriors. Commander Genda finally speaks, his voice quiet but carrying weight. The captain raises valid tactical concerns. Admiral, we have indeed observed diminishing returns from special attack operations as American anti-aircraft capabilities improve. Agaki turns to face the map, his back to the assembled officers. Outside, the sound of aircraft engines rises and falls. Another sortie preparing for launch. Another group of young men climbing into cockpits they will never leave. The numbers are devastating. In April alone, over 900 pilots were lost in kamikaze attacks. May consumed another 900. June, July, the bleeding continues. You speak of tactical efficiency. Agaki says finally, still facing the map. But you miss the strategic purpose. The special attack is not merely about sinking ships. It is about showing the Americans that every inch of Japan will cost them dearly, that we will never surrender, that invasion will drown them in blood. It is about breaking their will. And has it? Fuchida asks. The question borders on insubordination, but he has already crossed that line. The Americans landed at Okinawa despite the kamikaze. They took Iwo Jima despite the kamikaze. Their fleet grows larger every month, while ours shrinks to nothing. Admiral, with respect, we are not breaking their will. We are exhausting our own capability to resist. The truth of this statement hangs heavy in the humid air. Everyone in the bunker knows the reality. The American industrial machine is overwhelming. For every ship Japan damages, America launches 3 more. For every pilot Japan trains, America trains 10. The mathematics of attrition are inexorable. Agaki turns back to face Fuchida, and for the first time, the rigid mask slips slightly. Behind the iron discipline, there is something else, doubt perhaps, or a weariness that goes beyond physical exhaustion. What you propose, Agaki says slowly, would require authorization beyond my level. The special attack strategy has the blessing of Imperial General Headquarters. To deviate would be to question the wisdom of the highest command. Then question it, Fuchida says, his voice dropping to near-whisper intensity. Admiral, you know as well as I do that this war cannot be won. The only question remaining is how it will end, and whether Japan will have any capacity left to negotiate terms, or will be forced into unconditional surrender with nothing to bargain with. This is the most dangerous ground yet. To speak openly of defeat, of surrender, is to invite execution. But Fuchida has calculated his risk. He knows that men like Agaki, despite their rigid exteriors, are capable of rational thought. And more importantly, he knows that the truth, once spoken, cannot be unheard. If we preserve our experienced pilots, Fuchida continues, if we maintain some level of operational capability, then when the time comes to negotiate, and it will come, Admiral, we will have something to offer besides rubble and corpses. The Americans are not monsters. They will accept surrender terms if we can demonstrate that we still have the capacity to resist, that peace serves their interests better than continued bloodshed. Lieutenant Commander Ataya steps forward. Captain Fuchida speaks for many of us, Admiral. We have not voiced these concerns, but we share them. I have trained pilots for 3 years. I have watched boys who could barely land on a carrier become skilled aviators. And then I have watched them fly away in aircraft loaded with explosives, their landing gear removed to save weight, no fuel for a return trip. It is, he searches for words, it is a waste of Japan's future. Another officer, a younger man whose name Fuchida does not know, speaks up. My brother flew at Okinawa, Admiral. He was 19. He had 40 hours of flight time. He missed the American carrier group entirely and crashed into the sea. His death accomplished nothing except to deprive our mother of her youngest son. The confessions begin to flow. One by one, officers who have maintained silence break their reserve. They speak of doubts suppressed, of questions unanswered, of the slow realization that the special attack strategy, for all its symbolic power, is a tactical dead end. Vice Admiral Agaki listens to it all, his face once again an unreadable mask. But Fuchida can see the calculations happening behind those eyes. Agaki is a warrior, yes, but he is also an intelligent tactician. He understands mathematics, and the mathematics of the current strategy lead only to extinction. Finally, Agaki raises a hand, silencing the room. Captain Fuchida, what you propose is mutiny. It contradicts direct orders from Imperial General Headquarters. If I were to support your position, I would be placing my own honor, my own life, at risk. Yes, sir, Fuchida acknowledges. And yet, Agaki continues, his voice softening almost imperceptibly, you may be correct. He pauses, letting the weight of that admission settle. I cannot officially sanction your refusal, but I can delay implementation of your orders. I can request clarification from headquarters. I can make inquiries about alternative deployment strategies. Such bureaucratic processes can take time, weeks perhaps. It is not approval, but it is not execution either. It is a crack in the facade, a momentary alignment between duty and pragmatism. In the meantime, Agaki says, his voice returning to formal command tone, you will continue your training responsibilities. You will prepare pilots for combat operations, all forms of combat operations. Is that understood? Yes, sir, Fuchida responds, recognizing the code within the code. He is being given permission to do exactly what he proposed, under the cover of bureaucratic delay. This meeting is dismissed, Agaki declares. Officers will not discuss what was said here. Captain Fuchida remains in his current assignment, pending further orders. The officers file out of the bunker into the harsh sunlight. Fuchida pauses at the entrance, letting his eyes adjust. Across the tarmac, he can see young pilots climbing into Zeros, their faces set with determination and barely concealed fear. Some of them will return, some will not. But because of what just happened in that bunker, some who would have died needlessly might now survive. August 8th, 1945. Naval Officers Club, Tokyo. The club is nearly empty. Most of Japan's naval officers are dead, missing, or deployed to distant bases. Those who remain in Tokyo gather in small groups, speaking in low voices, their eyes constantly moving, watching for the military police who have become increasingly aggressive in rooting out defeatist sentiment. Fuchida sits at a corner table with Commander Genda and 3 other senior pilots, Commander Tadashi Nakajima, Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Murata, and Commander Takahisa Amagai. These are not random companions. They are Pearl Harbor veterans, men who have survived 4 years of war, men whose skill and luck have kept them alive when so many others have perished. The sake is poor quality, diluted and weak. But it serves its purpose, loosening tongues and lowering defenses. The Americans dropped something on Hiroshima yesterday, Nakajima says quietly. The reports are being suppressed, but I have a cousin in the army. He says the entire city is gone. One bomb. 100,000 dead, perhaps more. The number is incomprehensible. Fuchida tries to visualize 100,000 people and fails. It is a statistic too large for human comprehension. One bomb. Murata shakes his head. That's not possible. The Americans have developed a new weapon, Genda says. I have heard rumors from intelligence sources. A bomb that uses atomic fission, releasing energy equivalent to thousands of tons of conventional explosives. If the reports are accurate, Hiroshima was destroyed by a single B-29 carrying a single device. Silence falls over the table. They are naval aviators, men who understand the destructive power of aerial bombardment. But this is something beyond their experience, beyond their comprehension. If they can destroy an entire city with one bomb, Amagai says slowly, then what is the point of any resistance? What is the point of special attacks, of conventional defense? They can simply erase Japan one city at a time. Which is precisely why we must end this war, Fuchida says, his voice urgent but controlled. The conversation we had with Admiral Agaki, that was 3 days ago. We are running out of time. If Japan does not surrender soon, there may be nothing left to surrender. Nakajima leans forward. I heard you refused Kamikaze orders. Is that true? Fuchida nods. I did. And Agaki did not execute me. Did not even officially discipline me. He understands, even if he cannot say it openly, that the current strategy is madness. How many others feel as we do? Murata asks. How many would refuse such orders if given the chance? Fuchida has been cataloging this information carefully, reaching out through informal channels, speaking to fellow pilots in coded language, gauging sentiment without exposing himself unnecessarily. I have spoken with approximately 40 senior pilots, he says. Most share our concerns. Many have expressed willingness to resist kamikaze orders if there were any possibility of surviving such resistance. They fear not death itself, but meaningless death, the waste of their skills and experience for no strategic gain. 40 pilots, Genda muses. That's a significant number. If 40 senior officers were to collectively resist special attack orders, it would create a crisis in the command structure. It might force a broader reevaluation of strategy. Or it might result in 40 executions, Amagai counters. The military police are executing people for far less. Yesterday, I heard they arrested a Navy captain for suggesting that surrender might be inevitable. He was taken to Sugamo prison. No one has seen him since. The risk is real. Japan in August 1945 is a pressure cooker of paranoia and fanaticism. The military government, facing certain defeat, has become increasingly desperate and irrational. Officers suspected of defeatist sentiment are disappearing. Civilians who speak of surrender are beaten in the streets. The entire nation is being held hostage by a military leadership that cannot admit what everyone knows, that the war is lost. There is another consideration, Fuchida says, lowering his voice further. I have been approached indirectly by representatives of certain members of the imperial household. They did not identify themselves explicitly, but the implication was clear. There are people close to Emperor Hirohito who understand the need for surrender, but lack the military support to make it happen. This is the most sensitive information yet. To discuss the emperor's intentions, to suggest that he might be considering surrender against the wishes of his military command, is to enter territory where a single misspoken word could be fatal. What do they want from us? Nakajima asks. They want evidence that the military is not monolithic, Fuchida explains. They want to show the emperor that senior officers, combat veterans, men whose loyalty and courage are beyond question, believe that surrender is necessary. If we can provide that evidence, it might give the emperor the political cover he needs to override the military hardliners. Genda stares into his sake cup, his face troubled. This is conspiracy. This is plotting against the government. If we are discovered, we are already discovered, Fuchida interrupts. Admiral Agaki knows. The military police probably have files on all of us. We are being watched, evaluated, measured for loyalty. The only question is whether we act before they act against us. What do you propose? Murata asks. Fuchida pulls a folded document from his uniform pocket. It is a single sheet of paper, densely written in careful characters. I have drafted a memorandum to be submitted to Navy Minister Admiral Yanai. It argues, in careful technical language, that continued special attack operations are depleting Japan's capability to negotiate favorable surrender terms. It recommends preservation of experienced pilots and aircraft for potential post-war reconstruction. It does not explicitly call for surrender. That would be suicidal. But the implications are clear to anyone with military understanding. He slides the document to the center of the table. I need signatures. Senior pilots, Pearl Harbor veterans, men whose records are impeccable. If we can present this as a collective assessment from combat veterans rather than the complaint of a single malcontent, it will carry more weight. The men exchange glances. This is the moment of decision. To sign such a document is to risk everything, career, honor, life itself. But to refuse is to continue on the path to national extinction. One by one they sign. Gender first, his signature bold and unhesitating. Then Nakajima, Murata, Amagai. For names join Fuchida's on the document. Not a revolution, but a statement. A small act of defiance that might, if circumstances align correctly, contribute to something larger. I will add more names over the next day, Fuchida says, folding the document carefully and returning it to his pocket. I know at least 20 other pilots who will sign. By the time this reaches Admiral Yanai, it will represent a significant portion of Japan's surviving naval aviation leadership. And if Yanai ignores it? Amagai asks. If he dismisses it as defeatist nonsense? Then we have tried, Fuchida replies. And when the historians write about this period, they will know that not everyone embraced the madness, that some officers attempted to preserve Japan's future even at great personal risk. August 9th, 1945. Navy Ministry, Tokyo. Admiral Mitsumasa Yanai sits in his office, the memorandum spread on his desk. He is a moderate, a man who has always advocated for caution and pragmatism. He opposed the war with America from the beginning, arguing that Japan lacked the industrial capacity to sustain conflict with such a power. Events have proven him correct, but this is cold comfort. The document before him represents something unprecedented, a collective statement from senior combat pilots questioning military strategy. The signatures include some of Japan's most decorated aviators. These are not pacifists or cowards. They are warriors who have proven their courage repeatedly. And they are saying, in carefully coded language, that the war must end. Yanai has been waiting for something like this. He is part of a quiet faction within the government that supports surrender, but lacks the political power to advocate for it openly. The military hardliners, men like War Minister Korechika Anami and Army Chief of Staff Yashijiro Yamizu, remain committed to fighting to the last man, believing that sufficient resistance might force the Americans to negotiate rather than demand unconditional surrender. But Yanai understands mathematics as well as Fuchida does. This morning brought news of a second atomic bomb, this one destroying Nagasaki. In the span of 3 days, 2 cities have been erased. If the Americans have more such weapons, and intelligence suggests they do, then Japan faces not merely defeat, but annihilation. The memorandum from Fuchida and his fellow pilots provides exactly what Yanai needs, evidence that the military is not unified, that respected combat veterans recognize the necessity of surrender. He can use this document to influence the emperor, to provide political cover for a surrender decision. Yanai summons his aide. I need to meet with Lord Keeper of the Privy Seal Kido immediately. This cannot wait. August 10th, 1945. Imperial Palace, Tokyo. The Imperial Conference Chamber is thick with tension. Emperor Hirohito sits at the head of the table, his face composed, but his eyes showing the strain of leadership in catastrophe. Around him are the key decision-makers: Prime Minister Suzuki, Navy Minister Yanai, War Minister Anami, Foreign Minister Togo, and the Chiefs of Staff. They have been debating for hours. The hardliners argue for continued resistance. Anami insists that Japan can inflict such casualties on an American invasion force that the terms of surrender will improve. Yumiza claims that the military still has the capacity to fight. Neither man acknowledges the atomic bombs, the Soviet declaration of war that morning, or the complete collapse of Japan's strategic position. But Yanai has the memorandum, and at the crucial moment, he introduces it. "Your Majesty," Yanai says, his voice cutting through the argument, "I must share information that bears on this discussion. I have received a memorandum from Captain Mitsuo Fuchida and 41 other senior naval aviators." The room falls silent. Fuchida's name carries weight. He is the Pearl Harbor attack leader, a symbol of Japan's early victories. "These officers," Yanai continues, "men whose courage and loyalty are beyond question, have collectively assessed that continued special attack operations are exhausting Japan's capability to negotiate. They argue that we are consuming our institutional knowledge, our trained personnel, our future capacity, for diminishing returns. They recommend immediate preservation of remaining military assets for potential reconstruction." War Minister Anami's face darkens. This is defeatist sentiment. These officers should be arrested. "These officers," Yanai counters, his voice hardening, "are heroes. They have fought for 4 years. They have lost comrades, survived battles, witnessed the evolution of this war from triumph to tragedy. And they are telling us, with all their experience and expertise, that the current strategy is unsustainable. To dismiss their assessment would be to ignore reality." Emperor Hirohito raises a hand, silencing further debate. His voice, when he speaks, is quiet but carries absolute authority. "We have heard arguments for continued resistance. We have heard arguments for surrender. We have now heard from our combat veterans that continued resistance depletes rather than strengthens our position." He pauses, his gaze moving across each face. The time has come to bear the unbearable and endure the unendurable. We must end this war. The decision is made, not because of the atomic bombs alone, not because of the Soviet invasion alone, but because the confluence of military disaster, political maneuvering, and the quiet resistance of men like Fuchida has created the conditions for surrender. Anami argues still, pleads for one more battle, one more chance to bloody the Americans. But the Emperor's decision is final. Japan will accept the Potsdam Declaration. The war will end. August 15th, 1945. Kanoya Air Base, Kyushu, Japan. Fuchida stands on the tarmac as the Emperor's voice crackles through the radio, announcing surrender to the nation. Around him, pilots weep openly. Some in relief, some in shame, some in confusion. The war that has defined their lives, that has consumed their youth and comrades, is over. Vice Admiral Agaki approaches, his face unreadable. "Captain Fuchida, you have been summoned to Tokyo for debriefing. The Supreme Allied Commander's staff wishes to interview senior officers about Japanese military operations." Fuchida nods. "Yes, sir." Agaki stands silent for a moment, then speaks quietly, his words meant only for Fuchida. "You were correct. About the special attacks, about the waste, about everything. I hope you know that your resistance, your memorandum, it made a difference. Admiral Yanai told me personally that your document influenced the Emperor's decision. And yet thousands still died." Fuchida replies, "Thousands who might have been saved if we had acted sooner." "Yes," Agaki acknowledges, "thousands died, but millions were saved. If the war had continued another month, another week even, the atomic bombs would have continued. Tokyo would have been next, then Osaka, then Kyoto. The Americans would have erased Japan from existence." He pauses. "Your refusal, Captain, your act of defiance, it was not treason. It was patriotism of the highest order." Agaki salutes, a gesture of respect between equals rather than the hierarchical acknowledgement of rank. Then he turns and walks toward his own aircraft, a bomber that he will pilot on one final, unauthorized kamikaze attack against American forces, choosing death over surrender, unable to abandon the code of Bushido even as Japan itself abandons it. Fuchida watches him go, understanding the contradiction, the tragedy of men caught between duty and reason, honor and survival. October 1945. Yokosuka Naval Base. The war is over. The occupation has begun. American forces control Japan, and the process of reconstruction, physical, political, spiritual, is underway. Fuchida has spent weeks in interviews with American intelligence officers, describing Japanese tactics, strategy, the inner workings of the Imperial Navy. During one session, an American officer asks about the Kamikaze program. "We never understood it," the American says. "The tactical effectiveness was minimal. The psychological impact was significant initially, but we adapted. Why did Japan continue these attacks even when the results were so poor?" Fuchida considers his response carefully. He is no longer bound by Japanese military discipline, no longer required to maintain official narratives. "Because," he says finally, "we confused sacrifice with strategy. We believed that the willingness to die would compensate for inferior resources, that spirit could defeat material. We were wrong. In modern warfare, courage is necessary but insufficient. You need production capacity. You need trained personnel who can learn and adapt. You need institutional knowledge that persists beyond individual battles." "But you refused to participate," the American notes. "You risked execution to oppose the kamikaze strategy." "Why?" "Because I understood mathematics," Fuchida replies, "and because I hoped, perhaps naively, that preserving Japan's human capital might give us something to build on after defeat. I wanted there to be a Japan worth surrendering to you, not just a nation of ghosts and ruins." The American officer makes notes, then looks up. "We've been interviewing other Japanese officers. Several have mentioned your name. They say you organized resistance to kamikaze orders, that you convinced dozens of pilots to refuse suicide missions, that your actions may have influenced the surrender decision." "I did what I believed was necessary," Fuchida says. "Nothing more. What you did was save lives," the American corrects. "American lives, yes, by hastening the surrender, but also Japanese lives, the pilots who would have died in kamikaze attacks, the civilians who would have died in atomic bombings or an invasion. You saved lives by recognizing when courage becomes foolishness, when honor becomes suicide." 1951, Tokyo. Fuchida's life has taken unexpected turns. He has become a Christian, converted after reading about an American bombardier who returned to Japan as a missionary rather than seeking revenge. He lectures about the war, about the mistakes made, about the lessons learned. He also speaks about the 40 pilots who signed his memorandum, about their quiet act of resistance in the face of fanatical nationalism. Of those 40, 23 survived the war. The others died in the final weeks of fighting, some in kamikaze attacks they could not refuse, some in conventional combat, some in accidents or illness. But their signatures on that document, their willingness to risk everything to question suicidal strategy, became part of the historical record. It influenced the surrender decision. It preserved lives. It mattered. In his lectures, Fuchida emphasizes a single point. Patriotism is not blind obedience. True loyalty to one's nation sometimes requires the courage to question, to resist, to advocate for difficult truths, even when doing so violates every social and military norm. The greatest threat to Japan in 1945, he tells his audiences, was not the American military. It was our own inability to accept reality, to adapt strategy to circumstances, to value survival over symbolic gestures. The kamikaze attacks did not hasten victory. They delayed the inevitable while consuming our future. He pauses, looking out at faces that still show the scars of war, veterans, widows, orphans, survivors. I refused an order that would have killed me to no purpose. That refusal was not cowardice. It was the most courageous act of my military career. And I pray, that future generations will remember that sometimes the hardest thing, the bravest thing, is to choose life over death, reason over honor, survival over sacrifice. The audience is silent, absorbing his words. In post-war Japan, these are still controversial ideas. The mythology of kamikaze, of noble sacrifice, of spiritual purity through death, remains powerful in some quarters. But Fuchida speaks with the authority of experience, with the credibility of a man who led the Pearl Harbor attack, who fought throughout the war, who earned the right to question the mythology. 1976, Fuchida's home, Kashiwara, Japan. Fuchida is 74 now, his health failing, his time limited. He sits in his study, surrounded by books and documents, preparing his memoirs. He wants to leave a record, a testimony to the events of 1945, to the quiet resistance that helped end the war. He has stayed in contact with many of the pilots who signed his memorandum. They meet occasionally, aging warriors comparing notes on a conflict that grows more distant with each passing year. They talk about the friends who died, the decisions made, the alternative histories that might have been. Do you think it mattered? One veteran asks during a reunion. Our resistance, the memorandum, all of it, did it really change anything? Fuchida considers the question carefully. History has no control group, he says finally. We cannot know what would have happened if we had remained silent, if we had followed orders without question. But I know this. We provided Admiral Yanai and Lord Keeper Kido with evidence they needed to influence the Emperor. We demonstrated that the military was not monolithic, that respected combat veterans, questioned the strategy, and the Emperor cited the military's internal divisions as one factor in his surrender decision. So we helped end the war? Another pilot asks. We contributed to ending it, Fuchida corrects. Along with the atomic bombs, the Soviet invasion, the naval blockade, the conventional bombing, the countless other factors. History is rarely shaped by single causes. But yes, we contributed. And in contributing, we saved lives, perhaps thousands, perhaps tens of thousands. That matters. He looks around at his old comrades, these men who defied their culture, their training, their entire worldview to speak truth to power in a time when truth was treason. What we did, he continues, was choose reason over ritual, survival over symbolism. We recognized that the emperor we truly served was not the divine being of state propaganda, but the actual man who bore the weight of his nation's suffering, and we gave him the political cover he needed to make the hardest decision of his life, to surrender, to accept defeat, to save his people from annihilation. The veterans nod, their faces showing the complex emotions of men who betrayed their orders to save their nation, who committed treason in service of a higher loyalty. I have no regrets, Fuchida declares. If I could return to August 1945, knowing what I know now, I would make the same choice. I would refuse the kamikaze order. I would organize resistance. I would risk execution for the chance to save lives, because that ultimately is what warriors should do, not die gloriously, but ensure that death serves purpose rather than pride. 1976, Final Reflections. Mitsuo Fuchida dies in May 1976, his memoirs complete, his testimony recorded. In his final writings, he returns again and again to the events of August 1945, to the memorandum, to the quiet conspiracy of reason in a time of madness. He estimates that his resistance, and that of the 40 pilots who signed his document, hastened Japan's surrender by perhaps 2 to 3 weeks. Not a large number in historical terms, but significant in human lives. If the war had continued another week, American planners were prepared to drop a third atomic bomb on Tokyo. Another week after that, a fourth on Osaka. Conventional bombing would have continued. The Soviet invasion of Manchuria would have advanced further, with corresponding civilian casualties. The naval blockade would have tightened, causing mass starvation. 2 to 3 weeks. Perhaps 50,000 lives saved. Perhaps 100,000. The numbers are speculative, but the principle is clear. By refusing suicide orders, by advocating for rational strategy, by giving political leaders the cover they needed to accept reality, Fuchida and his fellow pilots made surrender possible sooner than it might otherwise have occurred. It was not a dramatic intervention. There were no battles won, no enemy forces defeated. It was simply the quiet accumulation of pressure, military, political, moral, that finally exceeded the resistance of those who would fight to extinction. In his final letter to his fellow surviving pilots, Fuchida writes, "We did not win the war. We helped end it. That is a different kind of victory, less glorious, but perhaps more important. We chose life over death, reason over honor, survival over sacrifice. And in making that choice, we preserved something precious, not Japan's empire or military power, but its people, its future, its possibility of renewal. I hope that future generations will remember us not as the pilots who attacked Pearl Harbor, but as the officers who had the courage to stop attacking when further attacks served no purpose but pride. That is the legacy I wish to leave, that patriotism sometimes requires disobedience, that loyalty sometimes demands resistance, that the hardest act of courage is knowing when to stop fighting." The letter ends there, a final testament from a warrior who learned that the greatest victory is not in dying for one's country, but in ensuring that one's country survives to see another day.